Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I will warn you guys, my cats have been a little crazy, so you might hear them in the background. But I'm so excited to go over verse 2. So we are in Ruth chapter 1, verse 2. And yesterday we went from the big picture. We were looking at the big picture, the setting, where all of this took place. And now in verse 2, we're shrinking down. We're looking at the subjects of this book. And what we have to remember is that in verse 1, they didn't give us the names of the family. They kept that anonymous. It was just simply a man, his wife, and 2 sons. And that was because the author wanted us to focus not on the family, but on where the family came from and where the family was going. So I'm going to read verse 2. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Milion and Kilion. They were Ephraites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, remember we talked about how names in the Bible mean something. It's not just a random name. It is sometimes a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. And the name of the man is Elimelech. Elimelech means my God is king. Remember that. Remember that Elimelech is my God is king. Naomi means pleasant or gentle. So you have my God is king and pleasant and gentle. Now it's going to flip. Milion and Kilion mean sick and dying and wasting away. So you got my God is king, gentle, sick and dying. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't name my children that. But it shows us something. Simply in these names, we're learning something. We're learning that in the beginning, when Elimelech and Naomi were born, we can kind of figure that people were still following God. Their parents, especially Elimelech, where he was named my God is king, they were following God. By the time Milion and Kilion were born, it didn't seem like that was happening because their names are sick and dying. But we have to also see something here. Again, the author reminds us where they're from. They're from Bethlehem, the house of bread. They're from Judah. Praised. Thankful. So you have my God is king and gentle from the house of bread and from thankful. Is this making a little bit of sense? But I also want to focus on the fact of Elimelech. Let's go back to Elimelech's name. My God is king. Do you remember the last verse in the book of Judges? In the book of Judges, the last verse is, when Israel had no king, they did what was right in their own eyes. My God is king. What is this telling us? This is telling us that Israel did have a king. We have a king. God is our king. God is above all things. God was above the judges. God is above the government. God is above everything. God is above you and me. God is king. But the Israelites didn't see that. They wanted an earthly king. They didn't have an earthly king like everybody else. So when we look back on that verse now, when we look back on when in the days where there was no king, Elimelech's name is telling us the truth. There is a king, and the king is God. We also see that instead of just saying they went to Moab, it says they settled there. Some versions of the Bible say they sojourned there. They became part of the culture there. So they went from the culture that was going on in Israel to the culture that was going on in Moab. Now, in Moab, the stuff is messed up in Judges. In Moab, it's even worse. In Moab, they're worshiping pagan gods. They're being promiscuous with anybody and everybody. I mean, this place was not for the Israelites. But they went there. They settled there. They bought a house there. They did all of these things. And that's what the author is trying to show us. But the author is foreshadowing what's about to happen. When we make decisions that go against what God wants us to do, even in the midst of a crisis, we see that it doesn't work out. And I don't want to jump ahead, but we see that the main focus or the main characters in this story are not Elimelech, and they're not Milian and Kilion. It's Naomi. So the thing we can grasp, the thing I want us to remember in this verse, is that Milian and Kilion, sick and dying, are the kids. My God is King is the father, and gentle is the mother. And why is this important? Elimelech was making all the decisions. We don't know how old Milian and Kilion were when the family went over to Moab. We're not quite sure. People aren't quite sure where it exactly falls in the book of Judges. But what we do know is that the head of the household, Elimelech, made the decision to go to Moab. His wife had to follow him, because back in those days, it wasn't like now, where I can run a business, I can own property. It wasn't like that back then. A woman needed a man to be able to do those things. He owned the property. He was the one in charge of the business. He was the one who was in charge of the flocks and all of that. So Naomi had to follow her husband. Milian and Kilion had to follow their father because they were not married yet. So they still stayed with their family. And like I said, we don't know how old they were. But that's really not the point of this verse. This verse is telling us who they are. Just like who we are. I don't know about you, but have you ever searched the meaning of your name? My name is Anastasia. And Anastasia means the one who shall rise again. Kind of a little crazy. But that used to be the thing I'd hold on to. I didn't really like the name Anastasia because there was a movie and, all of this stuff. Cinderella, Anastasia was the wicked stepsister in the movie Anastasia. She was a lost princess who didn't remember her family, and she was an orphan. And then there was 50 Shades of Grey as I got older. And I'm not going to get into that movie, but herein lies the thing. God names us. God named my kids, even though I didn't know that was what was happening. I'm also from Providence. Providence means God protects. Kind of crazy, huh? The girl who was an atheist, a raging atheist. Now, mind you, by the time God found me, I'm going to change that. From the time I found God, because He was always with me, I was a raging atheist. I was completely against Him. Why? Because I thought he didn't love me. Now, mind you, my name means the one who shall rise again, and the place I was born was God protects. Yeah. Are you putting those two and two together? I've made a pause because I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the fact that my life was not very easy. There was many times where stuff should have happened, but it didn't. Why? Because God protected me. Even though I wasn't turning to Him, just like the Israelites weren't turning to Him. In the book of Judges, God protected me. Even though bad stuff still happened. And that's something that we're going to talk about in the next verse tomorrow. Is the start of the trials of this family. But God protects me. We're going to see what happens when Naomi praises God and is thankful. But like Israel, we all wrestle with God. And that's okay. I want you to understand that in the midst of stuff going on, I'm not saying you can't ask why. You can. Of course you can. But we have to understand that even when we're asking why, we can't stay there. So why is Elimelech named my God as king, but his children are named sick and dying? Again, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't name my kids sick and dying. That's foreshadowing. But this family, now that we know this family, now that we're learning about this family, we can start to see the picture that is being formed. So remember, we're going from the big picture, which is the culture around this family, because we go from one culture to another culture. We go from Israel to Moab. Now, in contrast, if you read the book of Judges, by the end of it, it doesn't seem that there is quite a contrast as much as at the beginning. At the beginning, there was a strict contrast between Moab, which was a pagan place that worshipped idols and sacrificed, people to these gods. And then you have Israel, who relies on the one true God. That's complete opposite. But by the time the book of Judges ends, it's not that much different, because they're relying on themselves. They're turning themselves into gods. When we rely on ourselves, honestly, we're worshiping ourselves, because we can do it all. I can fix the problem that I have, but that's not true at all. God is the one who can help us through. God is the one who can fix what we have broken. They were scared. Elimelech was scared, and I don't want to downplay that at all. I don't want to downplay the fact that Elimelech was faced with something huge. There was a famine. Now, we don't quite know their status in Israel, but either way, they were faced with a famine. They were faced with no food. And we've seen this in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We've seen in the book of Elijah, we see that there's a widow who pretty much has nothing. She has a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour, and she literally is about to make her and her son's last meal when God speaks to her and tells her to give the person that's coming, the prophet that's coming, the bread. She only has enough to make one loaf of bread. But because she listens to God, her oil never runs out, her flour never runs out, and she has a constant flow of food. Here, That's not what happened. Here, Elimelech ran. And I know in my own personal life that even when I feel like I have nothing, if I turn to God, He makes it possible. If I try doing it on my own, I'm beating my head against a wall because I can't figure out how to fix the situation, how to fix the crisis that I'm in. Elimelech chose to fix the crisis on his own, and he ended up in Moab. He took his family to a place where they shouldn't have gone. But like I said, I don't want to undermine what Elimelech was feeling, because feelings are very important. And God knows we have emotions and we have feelings and we have all of that. But to dive into our feelings and to live in that moment of, I am so scared about what's about to happen, and we stay there and we try to fix it, that's when we need to turn around and look at what we're doing and going, can we fix this situation? Can I make money come out of nowhere? No, I can't, but God can. Can I make food come out of nowhere? No, but God can. And that's what I feel like the author is trying to tell us here, is that yes, Elimelech was facing no food, but we're going to see that the famine ends. Israel actually becomes very bountiful. But they're in Moab. They're in Moab. They're in a place where they're not supposed to be. And instead of being in the house of bread that becomes plentiful and the famine ends, they're in another place. God provided what Israel needed, even in the midst of them trying to fix it on their own. But they didn't get that. They didn't get that blessing because they went to a place where they shouldn't have been. So here's my question for you. Question for you is, are you trying to fix it on your own? Now, I don't know what you're going through. And I pray that God shows up in these moments. I don't know if you're facing a major crisis. But here's the thing. When we rely on ourselves, we can end up sometimes in a place where we're not supposed to be. It's hard. Facing something like a famine, facing something like an eviction, facing something like I don't even know. There's so many things. I can say insert problem here. It's hard. It's hard to see how we can get out of this. But we don't want to run. Turn to God. Look at Him and say, I don't know what to do. And it's okay. We learned through the name of Israel that it's okay to wrestle with God. It's okay to say, I don't get this. I don't understand why I'm going through this thing. I don't understand why this is happening. It's okay to ask those questions. God is not saying, follow me, don't ask me questions, don't feel your feelings. No. He knows that we have emotions. In the book of Psalms, David says, but when I am afraid, I put my trust in God. But when? Not I can't be afraid, not, God's not saying, don't ever be afraid. No, but David is reminding us, but when we feel afraid. So when we're going through that famine, when we're going through that crisis, we put our trust in God. Because God is the one who can rescue us. And it's not always the answer we want. And that's something I want to stress. It's not always the answer we want, but it's the answer we need. I pray today that if you're going through something, if it's something very difficult, and it's hard, and it's scary, and you don't know what you're about to go up against, accept those feelings. Give them to God. Talk to God. Ask Him why. If you've gone through something in the past, you can do the same thing. You can ask Him why. And you can say, I don't like what happened. I don't like what's going on. But don't live in that. Don't stay in that why. Put your trust in God and say, I don't know how you're going to fix this, but I know you can. I know you're able. In the New Testament, Jesus is talking to a man who has leprosy. And leprosy in that time, pretty much you got shunned. You were out of the community. You couldn't talk to anybody. You couldn't go near your family or your friends. Nothing. You were unclean. This man with leprosy said, I know if you are willing, you can heal me. If you are willing. That's what he says to Jesus. He doesn't demand that Jesus does it. He's professing that he knows he can do it. And we need to say the same thing. I know you can do this if you're willing to do it. And that doesn't mean that God doesn't want to do these things. But we need to acknowledge that we can't go up to Him and we can't demand Him to do something. But we can say, Lord, like a father, I need you. Like a parent, I'm scared. Comfort me. And He will. He's always willing. He's always willing. He's always able. And He's always bigger than whatever we're going through. And that's what Elimelech should have seen. Is that He's bigger than his problem. He's bigger than the famine. God is bigger. And He knows everything. And He's always willing to help us. So I'm going to end this video. Because it's about 25 minutes long. I want to end on this. Today, no matter what you're facing, no matter what happens, if you have to ask why, ask why. But then turn around and say, I put my trust in you, Lord. I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to go to the place you don't want me to go, even though that's my instinct. That's what I want to do, is I want to fix it on my own. I want to make it better because I'm scared. That's human instinct. We need to go against that human instinct. We need to go against what we want to do. And we need to know that God is willing to do what He is going to do. And He's going to comfort us. He's going to make it bountiful in whatever way He wants. Like I said, we don't always get what we want. Just like a parent doesn't always give their kids what they want. But we always get what we need. And sometimes we need to go through something. Not for ourselves, but for others. To show His glory. So, I hope you guys today have a wonderful day. And I hope you guys see God all around you.